So for people who've not been here before, I do this every year. It's kind of an overview of where we are with the community and the toolkit, just from my perspective. Um, well, you'll see. For those of you who have heard parts of this before, it has been updated and many of the pictures are new. So if you are bored with the content, you can always look at the pictures. I'm happy to answer questions about the pictures later. The pictures are nice. They're all mine. Well, I didn't take them, but they're all from things that I did with my partner. So I'm going to do a What's New session after we're done with this. And because I never get through the What's New session and the state of the toolkit in 1 hour, we'll spread the What's New session over the meeting. So there's going to be a couple more half-hour What's New sessions where I talk about stuff that's new in the toolkit. And we also have other people who've done development present the stuff that they're working on or that they're interested or that they've contributed. So I'm going to start with looking at adoption and usage of the toolkit. It's always important to know who is actually using the RDKit, what they're doing with it. Some of that information we get from the community survey, but we can try and get it from other places. It's really hard with open source. Like if you're a commercial software provider, you are, from my perspective, in this wonderful point where you know how many people are using your software because you know how many licenses you've sold, right? Or depending upon how much tracking you build into your software, you may even know what people are doing with it. We do open source, we have no idea how many people are using it or what they're doing with it. So we have to kind of guess. So one way, we saw 95% of people are using it via Python. Most of them are using that via Conda. So we can look at Conda install counts and try and get a guess of how many people are using the toolkit just by the number of times it gets installed. This is a terrible measure. I mean, it's one of the things we have. Most of the things we have are terrible, so we do what we can. The reason this is a terrible metric is there's no way on earth that this number of people actually installed this version of the RDKit. What most of this is people installing stuff via CI scripts on GitHub, right? So automated scripts that run every time they update the software. But still, we can get some idea of what's going on. The other interesting thing it does let us do is keep track of which Python versions people are using and which operating systems they're using them on, because that helps us make some decisions about potentially going forward, deprecating support for particular things. If you use it from C#, there are people using the RDKit from C#. You can also download it from, Brian, is this NuGet? NuGet, not Nugget. NuGet. NuGet. There we can see how many people are doing that. Again, most of these are probably CI builds. Many thanks to Gareth at Glissade for getting this whole thing set up. You can install the RDKit via pip. I do not, for many reasons, recommend that people do this, but it is available there. That's supported from within the community. So Chris Kunis got this set up and still does occasional or does relatively regular updates. You can see a fair number of people are doing this, and again, mostly CI scripts. If you have questions about why I recommend not using pip, I'm happy to talk about that later, or if there's time, I can do my anti-pip. Pip is great. Pip is just not great for a complicated thing like the RDKit. It's really good for Python packages. It's not great for C++ Python packages. There's a JavaScript wrapper around the RDKit so that you can use it from inside web applications. You can see we have a bunch of people using that. Thanks to Michelle Moreau, who got that set up, and Paolo, who's not here yet but will be, is going to be taking over maintenance of that to make sure it stays up to date going forward. I mentioned already that all of those numbers, these download counts, are really not particularly great. We do them because it's nice for me to be able to say it, but meh. So do we have other ways of keeping track of the size of the community or how many people are adopting the RDKit? Oh, that's a duplicate slide. I do the pictures to entertain myself. So one way is we can look and see how it's being used in online tools or resources. And these are just some of the things I'm aware of. So if you run a publicly accessible website or an online web tool that's using the RDKit and you're not here, please send me email so I can add you to the slide. But the things we know, or that I know, Kimball and SureKimball are making heavy use of the RDKit. Zinc uses it. Google Patents has some stuff in the back. For people who don't know, I think it's still possible to do this. Google keeps doing weird things with their patents team, but you can actually do substructure and similarity searches in Google Patents. The PDBE uses it. Enamine is using it on their website. ChemSpace is using it. Andrea Folkheimer's Teach Open CAD uses it. And this probes and drugs thing, I just learned about this yesterday at the pre-meeting for the Eastern European Cheminformatics that I sat in some of. This is actually really cool, the probes and drugs website from CZ OpenScreen. So if you don't know about it, take a look at it. It's really neat. It's used in commercial tools. I mentioned already, we license it so that people can use it from within commercial software. This is just, I'm not going to go through all of them. This is a list of some of the software providers that are using the RDKit in their software or have publicly said that they're doing that. Again, if you're not here and you should be, let me know. We have community stats on GitHub. These are like anything of questionable value, but it's still nice to see how many contributions we have coming in or how many people are using the discussions, the GitHub discussions. How many of you do not know about GitHub discussions? Okay, very good. I'll mention more about this in a moment. Some other adoption measures. So there's the mailing list. The mailing list has had over the past year 14 messages. That used to be in the hundreds. And so the mailing list is dying. This is kind of expected because the younger people don't use email or mailing lists anymore. People have moved on to new things, right? So we're using GitHub discussions and other things for doing this. The mailing list is still there. If you're interested in it, people do still pay attention to it. There's no RDKit paper, which is kind of an ongoing joke. I make the joke every year that I'm 1/3 or 2/3 or 47% or whatever done writing the RDKit paper. There isn't one. There never will be one because I'd rather write code than documents. So there's no official citation, but still things show up in citations, so in Google Scholar. For example, every RDKit release has a DOI associated with it, so you can always cite the DOI for the version that you're using. Right? That's something that happens automatically. But what we see is last year, there were about 4,500 hits for RDKit in Google Scholar. And this year, up to this point, there have already been more than 4,000. So this is a nice adoption measure. This one goes up every year, which is I'm very happy to see. You can go to GitHub and search for from RDKit import chem, which those of you using it from Python, you know this is how probably this is in all of your files. So this is a nice way to see how many people are using it in open source tools. There we get 75,000 hits. For me, one of the most important ones is this meeting. So how many people are here? So we have, for each of the past X years, where X is a number greater than 5, we've had the UGM at full attendance. So we've maxed out the number of people we can accommodate in the room. And that's really nice to see because you have all chosen to spend your time here to show your interest, to show that you value this and you want to contribute. But hopefully you're all saying that by coming and sitting in this room and participating in the meeting for a couple of days. This expanded this year because Brian organized the North American UGM. So back in the spring in Boston, they had one, and I think you're hoping to have one next year as well, right, Brian? Okay, so there should be one of these in the US early next year as well. What's that? Okay, so the hope will be that it's in Montreal next year. That's in the springtime. Okay, I bring this up every time we talk about it, and anytime you use any open source tool or actually any piece of software, this is something you should be thinking about. There's a lot of different terms for it. I call it the bus problem. What the bus problem is what is the risk to you using a piece of software if the maintainer, if there's only one or a small number of maintainers of that piece of software? What happens if they get hit by a bus? It's kind of grim, right? But it's important to think about, does the software have a future if something happens to that maintainer? Probably they're not actually going to get hit by a bus, right? I might fall off a mountain. or maybe somebody just gets bored and decides to move on to other things. And it's important to keep in mind how many people actually can maintain the software that you're depending upon if that happens. It's been an ongoing focus for me for like the past 15 years to try and get the RDKit's bus factor up from 1, right? When it was first open source, I was the only one doing anything with it. So anybody depending on it was 100% dependent upon me. I don't like that, right? It's nice for me to be known. It's nice for me to stand up here and have everybody listen to me, but I don't want to be the person responsible for the whole toolkit, right? It's very important that there be a number of people who can do that. So one of the biggest things we did is 5-10 years ago, we expanded the number of maintainers, the number of people who can actually do commits in GitHub, who can change the main RDKit repository beyond myself. Right now, there are 4 of us. So there's myself, there's Brian, who's here, there's Ricardo, who's in the back, and then Paolo, who will be here later. This is, by the way, the first time that all 4 of us have been in one room in a very long time. So now we have a meteor problem. Hopefully we don't get hit by a meteor. Yeah, we're all coming from different places, and I came on the train, so no. Anyway, this is important. These other 3, so Brian, Ricardo, and Paolo, all know the code very well. If I were to get bored and wander off or fall off a mountain or whatever, get lost in a snowstorm, that was in July, by the way. Get lost in a snowstorm, then there's somebody who can take care of the toolkit, make sure it continues to go forward. This is a really good thing. If we look at people who are actually contributing code, this is the statistic that GitHub lets you do. So because I press the commit button on everything at the moment, I get lots of credit for stuff I don't do. So I always show up towards the top. Other major contributors are Dave Cosgrove, who unfortunately couldn't be here. I'll talk during the What's New session a lot about the stuff that Dave has added. And then we have, of course, the maintainers, Paolo, Ricardo, Brian, and then Tad at CDD. Tad also couldn't be here, but Jonathan is going to talk about some of the work that they're doing at CDD. I want to point out, I mentioned software companies. So Dave is a consultant who does work for other software companies, as well as just anybody who wants to pay him to do RDKit work. Paolo's at Novartis, but Ricardo, Brian, and Tad are all at software companies. Right, so this is a very important thing for us. We are open source, but we have contributions from closed source. And it's important for the ongoing progress of the RDKit. We've had 38 different people actually do pull requests to contribute to the code. Again, this is a good number. It's nice to see people other than just the 4 maintainers contributing software. And one of the other things that's important to me, and you should not care about this, is we do a fair amount of maintenance work. So maintenance work is just going in and cleaning up old code, making it easier to maintain, making it probably not easier to use, but easier for us to take care of, retiring code. Right? It doesn't have a large impact on you as an end user, but it means we're thinking about the long-term health of the project, and we're trying to make sure that the toolkit stays up to date and stays actually maintainable. I joke every time about anytime anybody asks me about the RDKit roadmap, I don't drive, or very rarely drive, so I don't need a roadmap. The future work, what actually gets done, is really dependent upon the things that the maintainers need, or the things that people who contribute RDKit code need. Right, so there's not a long-term, you can't say, or you could ask me or one of the maintainers, what's coming in the next release of the RDKit, or what's coming in the next 3 releases of the RDKit? And the answer is we don't know. Right, there's long-term things we're working on. There's some things that are kind of clear that we've been working on for quite a while, but a lot of this stuff is just driven by what we need for our internal projects, what we need for the software we're working on, or just what we're interested in, or what people contribute. So some of the long-term things that I've been working towards for a while is making sure that all of the pieces you need to build a good compound registration system with the RDKit are there. I'm checking this one off. I think we're done. That was done about a year ago. There are compound registration systems built on top of the RDKit now. They're commercial ones and they're open source ones. We will hear about some of those during this meeting. Hopefully the people that wrote those did not find it an unnatural act to write those systems, right? You didn't have to do a huge amount of work working around RDKit missing features. The next one is to make sure all of the pieces are required to build a good corporate chemical database. This is the RDKit Postgres cartridge and making sure that it continues to move forward and is useful. There's still some work that needs to be done there. A long-running one for me is better support for polymers or for sequence-based things, and we'll hear more about that during this meeting, as well as organometallics. Organometallics are kind of tricky. I'm not going to go there now. I have a rant about organometallics if anybody's interested. We want to keep improving the performance of the RDKit because some people tell us all the time that the RDKit is too slow. How many of you think that the RDKit is too slow for what you're doing? Don't be shy. Okay, yeah, usual suspects. So actually, I should do this too. We need to improve the performance, right? The long-term, the way that we get things into the RDKit is there's an idea of something that should go in. We normally do an initial implementation. We make sure that it's correct, and then later we worry about performance, or we don't, and it just stays there and is slow. So things improve slowly over time. Hopefully things don't get worse over time. There's an ongoing thing that we're doing in the group at the ETH to improve the conformer generator. You'll hear more about that later today. And then, of course, ongoing cleanup of the code. I mentioned that already. It is nice to be able to occasionally take big steps forward, not just do incremental stuff. But sometimes this is really hard. So we are reliant upon a bunch of technology in the back, right? We're reliant upon the Python version that people are using. We're reliant upon the C++ version that people are using in the back. Anytime they roll out a new version of Python or a new version of C++, there's lots of great stuff in there that we could use in the RDKit. And generally, we cannot do that. And the reason we cannot do that is because just because Python 3.13 came out, and maybe it has something nice we want to use, or C++ 23 comes out and it has nice stuff we want to use, the majority of you, the majority of the community are not using that, right? So we can't move faster than the community in terms of the features of the languages that we take advantage of. So we have to be really careful. I mentioned cleanup. Part of cleanup is removing old code, code that nobody uses, or code that is redundant. This is also really tricky because we don't know what people are doing with the software. We can make announcements far in advance and say, we're thinking about removing this, get ready. But we can't just go and directly start removing things that we think people aren't using because we just don't know. I'll talk about some of these larger API changes. So the RDKit, I mentioned, it's going to turn 20 open source next year. The first code was written for it in 1999. The first code that is still there is from 2000, so it's 25 years old originally, the real code. I have learned a lot in the past 25 years, or at least I would like to think that I've learned a lot in the last 25 years, and I would do things differently now than I did 25 years ago. So there's some things that I would like to change to make it easier to use the RDKit or to make it more flexible, but we need to figure out a way to do that that doesn't break everybody else's code. And then finally, the most important one, how many of you were fortunate enough to have lived through the Python 2 to Python 3 transition? Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, the Python community made a decision when going from Python 2 to Python 3 that it was not going to be 100% backwards compatible. So there were some changes that they wanted to make in the language that were not backwards compatible. Those changes, I think, these days, most everybody would agree were good, but they broke a lot of code. And so it took more than a decade for Python 2 to be completely shut down and Python 3 to take over. There was more than a decade where the team was maintaining both versions. None of us have time to do that with the RDKit, right? So we really don't want to have that happen. So the goal is to be able to move forward slowly without creating this giant problem. So I mentioned some of this, what we're doing to be able to make changes. We're trying to minimize hard external dependencies. So we're trying to minimize depending on external libraries that might go away or might make incompatible changes that we need to then make incompatible changes in our code to handle. We're being very conservative about adopting language versions and features. So for example, the C++ backend, we just switched to C++20 this year. You might know that's C++20 came out, well, it came out in 20, so we're at 25 now. So we waited 5 years to switch to that. We'll probably wait a similar amount of time to switch to C++23, and then who knows what will happen with C++26. We're being conservative. Anytime we deprecate code, we announce that at least one major release in advance. That is always in the release notes. How many of you read the release notes? Okay, so it is worth always reading the release notes. And the reason, you don't have to read through all of it. There's a long list of bugs fixed and new features added. But at the top of every release notes are things like what was deprecated with this release, or what backwards incompatible changes were made, right? What did we change that's going to change things for you? That's always at the top of every release notes, if there are any. It is worth looking at those for every release, if you have code that depends on the RDKit. And then in GitHub, we tag issues or pull requests that result in these backwards incompatible changes. Back in 2024, we changed the release model, and this was to allow us to move a little bit faster. Before that, there were only 2 times a year that we could introduce new features. And in between that, about every month, we'd do a patch release that had bug fixes. These days, what we do is there's still about every month, there's a patch release, but we allow new features in the patch releases so that we can get things out more quickly. This is nice because the big releases, so like the upcoming 2025-09-1 release, they're much smaller. They don't have as much new stuff in them, because we can get new features out sooner. What we do use the major releases for is to potentially include these backwards incompatible changes. So again, please read the release notes, particularly for major versions. There are some ongoing big changes that I'm going to talk about in the What's New notebook, which I refer to as fixing the hydrogen mess, and changing the default stereo perception algorithm. The hydrogen mess is the bigger one. So to wrap up this bit, so there's some stuff I think that's really good about the state of what's going on with the RDKit. We do have steadily growing numbers of people using it and building things. I used to joke at UGM's past, many UGM's past, about world domination. We don't have world domination, but we're doing pretty well in terms of the number of people using the RDKit and how often you see it. And we are making steady progress on adding new features, fixing bugs, and cleaning up old stuff. But there's some stuff that's not great, not as great. The group of people who make regular contributions to the RDKit is pretty static, right? So there's 5 or 6 people that are regularly making contributions, or who are active on the discussions. We have this steadily growing user community. The steadily growing user community is definitely a mixed blessing, right? It's great to have more people using the RDKit. It's really good for us. It's really good to see people doing it. It's super motivating, but it means that there are a bunch of unanswered or partially answered questions on GitHub discussions, and there's a bunch of unaddressed bug reports that may or may not actually be bug reports in GitHub. And it would be nice to do something about this, right? It would be nice to have every question that gets asked on GitHub discussions to have a relatively quick answer. But this is something that I can't do. It's something the maintainers can't do. We can't do it ourselves. We need help from the community. So we need people more involved in helping with the discussions and answering other people's questions, giving other people advice. Ideally, there would also be more people involved with the code, both on the C++ and Python side. One, I think, nice step forwards to making that easier is something that came out of a hackathon at last year's user group meeting. So Rachel, can you raise your hand, please? Rachel in the back organized a hackathon topic to put together a getting started on how to contribute to the RDKit. That's now part of the standard RDKit documentation. So if you have questions about how to contribute from the code perspective, so Python or C++, this is a great place to go. It tells you everything you need to know. If it doesn't, please let us know so that we can fix it, or better, send us pull requests to fix it yourself. Again, so I don't know how to solve this whole problem, right? I can write code. I can approve pull requests. I can try and answer as many questions as I can in GitHub, but we need the community's help to really solve this going forward, to allow the community to continue to grow, to have it continue to be a welcoming place where people get answers to questions. If you're not a software developer and you still want to contribute, there are a bunch of things you can do, right? This is not just limited to people who know Python or who know C++ really well. You can use the code in your own projects and give us feedback. Good bug reports are always welcome. Ideas for things that we can improve are always welcome. Positive feedback via either the mailing list or GitHub discussions are definitely always welcome, right? I think if you've ever developed a piece of software, you know that most of the feedback you get is negative. Well, it's not negative. It's here's a bug, or here's something you should add, or why are you so stupid? We do get some of those. Answering questions on the mailing list or GitHub is also incredibly useful. Contributing improvements to the documentation is helpful for everyone. Writing blog posts with interesting information about the RDKit. You can either do that yourself, or if you have an idea that you think might be interesting to the broader RDKit community, I am always happy to have guest blog posts on the RDKit blog. This is particularly important this year because I set myself a goal at the beginning of the year to have a blog post every week. And having ideas for a blog post every week is hard. So if you want to, and finding time to write those posts. If you have ideas for blog posts or things you think the community might want to know, let me know, right? It's easy to do them. You just write a Jupyter notebook with the post. You can always contribute interesting scripts or libraries to the contrib folder. And then, or if you're at a place where you have funding, you can pay people to work on RDKit code. You can pay people to develop features. I do encourage you to reach out to the maintainers before doing this, because it would be sad if you paid somebody to add something that we then decided wasn't appropriate for the RDKit. So I have lots of mountain pictures. I mentioned that I do that to entertain myself, and hopefully for the people who've seen the talks, there is some relevance. So I actually, well, this is my old climbing helmet. I had a GitHub logo on it. I don't have a GitHub sticker anymore. So I had this because when Ricardo Ricardo, where are you? So Ricardo in the back is the one who convinced me to move to GitHub. When he did that, he gave me a book on it, which was an introduction to GitHub or to Git. And he gave me the GitHub sticker, which lived on my climbing helmet for years. And then basically all of the bags that I use for climbing are from the German Conference on Cheminformatics. So I have a million of these things. Anyway, that's irrelevant. So I think things are going well. Right? I think we're in general in good shape. There are some things which could improve, but I think the state is pretty good. Are there questions about all the stuff I just did? I have 10 more minutes that I'll get started on the what's new, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. Questions or comments?
This kind of a joke, no? You having so many nice pictures, you have to take past pictures from Wikipedia.
So for the people online, yeah, I have a lot of nice pictures, but the bus pictures from Wikipedia. So my defense on that, you're correct. My defense on that is the bus is, we've been to this pass a lot. We've seen this bus a lot. I've ridden on this bus a lot, but we generally don't take pictures of buses. Well, but you're right. This is a Wikipedia image. That's the bus from Meiringen to the Zusten Pass. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Rachel. Okay, so for people online or the people who just didn't hear Rachel, there are still some sections on the Getting Started and Contributing document that need to be filled in. So if you take a look at that and see a missing section and it's something you know about, feel free to contribute improvements to the documentation. The documentation tells you how to improve the documentation. I mean, that's the goal of that document, right? Is to tell you how to contribute to that document. Are there anything else out there before I move on to a quick bit of what's new and then we move on? Yeah.
Also have beta releases, right? As part of that, I think.
So there's a question if they're beta release. No, I don't do beta releases anymore because we used to do beta releases of the major releases, but now that the patch releases include new features, they come out so frequently, we don't do betas anymore. If you want to try to do a beta yourself, you can always, we do tag the beta so that people who are building their own version of the RDKit can try it out. We do that typically a week and a half to 2 weeks before the actual release. So there's no build that people can use, but the code is there for use.
I want to try it out. Python, right? You'd have to build it yourself.
Yeah, so if you want to try it from Python, you have to build it yourself. We looked at ways to automate this. The problem is, for people who don't know, if you're using the RDKit from Conda or PyPy, each of those involves 30 or 40 separate builds, right? Because there's a bunch of different versions of Python. There's a bunch of different versions of NumPy. There's a huge amount of work required to do that. And neither of the automated systems are particularly easy to set up to do betas. So if you want to use the beta, you really have to build it yourself. The documentation tells you how to do it, but it is definitely easier to use the pre-built things. Guillaume? Okay, so the suggestion is that we could do an LLM assistant to help filter the discussions or to work with the discussions. I'm reluctant to do that. And it's not because I'm from the older generation. So for people who don't know, if you use the RDKit from Python, things like Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude are really good at the RDKit in Python because there's a huge amount of public or open source sample code out there, and the systems work really, really well. I have tried asking some of those systems like questions, and I've not been incredibly satisfied with the answers I've gotten. So I'm a bit wary of deploying those to the real world without having a real edit on that. If you wanted to answer questions yourself, you could always, of course, try this and then hand edit it and paste it in. But then your name is on it, right? But again, if you've not tried it, the coding assistants really are good at the RDKit, particularly on Python. They also work quite well on the C++ side. They will occasionally invent methods or API functions that are not in there that probably should be. Most of the times I encounter one of these, I look at it and go, well, okay, that's not there, but I agree it ought to be there. So if you see one of those, feel free to file that as an enhancement request, because generally it's right that it should be there. Yeah.
You consider having like document containers for different data environments for contribution, because especially with C++, you quite difficult to get all the dependencies installed.
Yeah. So the question is if we've considered having Docker containers. So there is within the RDKit, if you look at where the minimal lib is, the minimal lib has a setup for doing Docker builds of the RDKit, and it does it specifically in order to build the JavaScript wrappers, but those could be relatively straightforwardly adapted. I would also be happy if anybody is a Docker expert and can actually contribute some Docker files that are robust and will work going forward. I would be happy to have that because I agree it would make it easier for people. My Docker knowledge is like 5+ years out of date. So I think if I were to do it, it would just look like a dinosaur wrote it. But I think that would be useful. Anything else? Okay. Yeah, there's about a minute left, so I'm not going to skip right to the what's new. We can go ahead and move on to the presentations. So I'll do a what's new. There's 2 sessions tomorrow where I'll go through these. As I mentioned already, if people have other questions about the toolkit or about anything I said that you don't want to ask in a larger room, feel free to come up to me during one of the coffee breaks. So thanks.